This is Countdown to Kickoff, where we show you games, players, or teams in program history on the road to opening kickoff. Next on the list, number 36, Atticus Sappington. Another hometown hero coming from Central Catholic in Portland, Oregon. Sappington originally enrolled at Oregon State in Corvallis. He officially transferred to Oregon in December 2023 and became a big piece of the puzzle for Oregon's 2024 season. After a tenure of inconsistent kicking at Oregon, Sappington came to Eugene and provided just that, consistency, going 14 for 16 in field goals and 41 for 43 in extra points, including a game-winning field goal giving Oregon their first win against Boise State in program history, as well as some clutch field goals to stay undefeated against a Wisconsin team that almost got the best of them.
Foot race to their sideline. Touchdown, Oregon!
Oh, ladies and gentlemen, children of all wages, welcome back to the show. This is the Oregon Ducks live stream podcast for SDP Studios. I used to call it Get Ducked, but let's keep the cheesiness for a place like ESPN or something. Just kidding. If you want to keep it that way, then let's keep it that way. I don't know. And I don't know what episode number it is because I had to start and stop it. But yes, I have my trusty towel here because, again, I sweat like a southern preacher. Hallelujah. Calapooya. As an old family friend of my parents' church used to say. Which makes sense because the Calapooya tribe used to live in the area of Oregon of which I lived, which was basically all of it. Anyway, it is media days, or was media days. I don't know. I frankly haven't really been paying attention, but it's the Comic-Con of college football, and specifically the Big Ten Conference. Now, what does media days even mean? Who knows? Well, of course, it's really for media institutions to sort of ask questions of coaches and players of what they expect to see in the upcoming season and sort of pick the brains of players and coaches as well as we all head into the upcoming season. But for me, I don't really pay attention much to it. There were some things that Dan Lanning said that I enjoyed. It's a way for certain players to sort of showcase themselves. It sounds like Mateo once again sort of stole the spotlight as he's expected to be obviously a big deal this upcoming season. Bryce Betcher, I believe, also made an impression. As far as I know, I did watch one interview with Dan Lanning doing First Things First over the course, and it's sort of the same sort of what's the phrase? Just the by the book sort of answers that you would expect, especially from someone who came about in the Saban and Kirby Smart sort of school of coaching philosophy, which means you're not going to get much in terms of other than the cardboard cutout answers. And you know what? That's fine. That's perfectly fine for that to be the answers because one, you don't know what the answers to those questions are going to be on July 25th anyway. You don't know until obviously the play is on the field. So you can set expectations in terms of game plan, not even game plans, because again, you don't want to give too much away, but you can sort of give expectations on the mindset going into the season. And of course, in general, the mindset shouldn't be anything different. in terms of, yeah, we're going to go out there, we're going to play to win, because what else would you want to be? But this is a great way to keep the media, the bigger media institutions engaged and give them enough to talk about for the next month or so, because let me tell you, the off season is an eternity. Oh my gosh, it feels like 10 years went by. And the unfortunate thing for Oregon is that it feels like 10 years have gone by, but 10 seasons have not. So unfortunately, the Rose Bowl decimation is still fresh in our minds. Granted, it is nice that the subject of the Rose Bowl was sort of touched upon, and it's not a controversial topic, but it's controversial in this way. A lot of people don't like the playoff structure and thinks it needs to change, especially because those who had a bye in this playoff, 4 teams had a bye in this playoff. All 4 teams lost. But here's the thing. At least when I was playing sports, layoffs were no excuse. And the rust that comes with massive layoffs or time in between games is built into the equation. However, despite it being built into the equation, there's no excuse for it. So I'm not going to really harp on that as the reason why the Ducks lost. Because there were also other teams, I believe like Arizona State when they played Texas, I believe. It's been a long time. Don't really want to fact check it right now, but that's not the example. It's just an example. The idea, though, is that the idea of what I'm getting at is the score discrepancy was different in every game. I.e., the difference was other teams, when they played, they were a little bit closer. They were within a couple possessions. And when the Ducks played, it was not. And the expectations going into that game should have been much higher for the Ducks to play better, despite the rust, considering their regular season performance. And that's why this one smarts a little bit with Duck fans and hopefully some of the players and coaches, because that was just a pathetic showing. And this year we will see if that set the program back or not. Now, that's kind of a throwaway line for now. Just sit on that. Don't worry about me just saying that. The point is, though, is that the huge layoff is no excuse. However, in every sport that I've ever played, that my friends have ever played at any level, for some reason, they have been able to hone in and get the playoff system that they have in a reasonable and correct way. And by that, I mean, there's no huge layoffs. If anything, there's just a bye week for the top seeds or a bye week for everybody, and maybe a 2-week bye week for the top seeds. That probably does actually need to change in college football, despite the no excuses side of things. That does probably need to change. Expanding the playoffs, I don't really think so. I think at this point, 12 is the sweet spot. I can't remember. Again, I don't follow the NFL very much. I believe the NFL. You know what? I'll fact check myself on this one, because I believe that the NFL has a 16 team. Let's see. How many teams in NFL playoff? 14. Okay. So that sort of confirms what I would like to believe is that 12 is kind of the sweet spot in terms of the playoff. I'm okay with having it mirror the NFL playoff. And how they run it. There is no reason why the college football season, especially because they're starting it earlier and earlier now each year, in the sense that they now have a week 0, and we're starting in late August rather than early September. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's like that could potentially be a 1 to 2 week difference that you see is added on the back end. It's like a snow day in the old days of school. If you had a snow day, if you lived in an area that had those, sure, you get the week off in January, February, or whenever that would hit. But guess what? You're going to school in June to make up for that time. So I'm okay with expanding it to maybe 14 to mirror the NFL. However, I think 12 is a pretty good sweet spot. So that is sort of the controversy that is sort of discussed with the playoffs. However, that sort of layoff because of the playoff system, again, is no excuse for poor performance. And with the Ducks last year, I understand last week I didn't really go that deep. I was too busy ranting about copyright rules and YouTube, so maybe I'll just go a little bit deeper and sort of give a further purview of what things are doing. Again, college football with Sam, if you want all the numbers, and the numbers sort of back my opinions on things of sort of what to expect from the team this year. It all sort of checks out. Just getting the vibe though of the team and the fan base is why you watch me, I suppose. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot when I say this every freaking episode, but who cares? It's my show and no one's watching, so who cares? Man, what was I talking about? All right. So, the Rose Bowl performance exposed one major thing. Now, the offense, sure, was rusty, and I think a lot of that was due to the layoff. That was the one side of things that you could arguably say the layoff affected, because the offense is so reliant on rhythm, and they were in a crazy rhythm, and then you got 4 weeks off not playing games, which again is so much different from practice. You can throw off your rhythm, especially when the opposing team has played at least a week before you did and they've found their rhythm. So that is the thing. However, with the defense, sure, it's like 5% the layoff. The rest of it, though, is just the weaknesses, the weak links in the chain finally broke. Sometimes you could have a chain with a weak link that lasts you long enough, but eventually you do something with that chain and it breaks. And that's what happened in the Rose Bowl. It was just unfortunate, the timing. And look, I am not throwing shade to Taisheem Johnson, Jabbar Muhammad, especially Jabbar Muhammad. Again, no shade at Taisheem Johnson when I single out Jabbar Muhammad, but Muhammad has proved himself at Washington the 2 years before and then transferred to Oregon. And he still played well on the field after. But no shade at Taisheem Johnson. No shade at Jabbar Muhammad. No shade at Nico Reed, Brandon Johnson, and Kobe Savage, and the rest, okay? No shade about them, okay? They did play at a very good and very high level, relatively consistently for Oregon in 2024, and they filled the gaps that needed to be filled competently. Okay, when I say that, I mean it. However, this isn't 2005 anymore, and back in the days when I played, okay? Gone are the days of the 5'9" defensive back. And that was an issue. Like when I used to play, again, I never had the makings of a varsity athlete. So take what I say, I guess, with a grain of salt enough. But I'll just say, in the era that I played, it was the heyday of the 5'9" defensive back. And usually it was guys who were too small to play wide receiver were sent as corners. So, you know, if you weren't 6 foot or above, you're a cornerback, sorry. And that's why when I hit my growth spurt, I mainly started playing offense more. And on the defensive side, yes, I played left corner, but I was moved eventually to free safety because I got bigger. And obviously the idea was, oh, short guys are fast, so they can keep up with these receivers. Well, the problem is even though these receivers are 6'4" compared to 5'9", there's not really much of a speed discrepancy anymore, especially now. Because you could arguably say back then you had a 6'5" receiver, he could have been slow, because especially in high school, you know, because he's a gawky, lanky, you know, 6'5" kid with size 14, 15 shoes that hasn't grown into himself yet. That doesn't really have that athleticism. But the problem is now that's not the case as much anymore. So now these receivers are just torching these small guys. So to compensate, a lot of other teams, you know, like Ohio State, the Alabamas, all those guys, now have wide receiver size secondary. Oregon didn't have that last year. We still had the old days of the 5'9" defensive back. And there's just nothing you can do about that, especially forgetting the generational talent that is Jeremiah Smith. Even if he wasn't generational, a lot of those plays were probably going to be made anyway, just because he's got 7 inches on these guys. You just got to throw it up to him. And you also don't have to be faster than those defensive backs to be a generational talent either. So it was just that. And then I noticed this in the Big Ten championship against Penn State. The defense was losing their mojo. And not really the defensive line. That didn't really come to the Rose Bowl either. But the defensive line was losing their mojo during the Rose Bowl. But the defense as a whole was losing their mojo in the Big Ten championship. And a lot of that had to do with coverage communication. Again, it was back to the secondary. And the linebackers, because also usually the linebackers are the ones who are the quarterbacks of the defense. They're the ones changing and adjusting coverages and calling defenses on the field if need be. And that just compounded once the Rose Bowl happened. They looked lost. Yes, it was a talent discrepancy as well between the NFL-ready wide receivers at Ohio State. But again, like it was during the regular season when Oregon beat Ohio State, with the proper scheming, you can sort of mitigate the damage of the talent gap. And that just wasn't there in the Rose Bowl. The safeties looked lost. The corners looked lost. The linebackers looked lost. The entire coverage side of the defense were never on the same page that whole game. And it showed in the score, because obviously with all the points that was given up, and especially quickly, They never found their rhythm. And then obviously, as you saw, again, I understand Ohio State took their foot off the gas, whatever. But you would see the tale of two halves. The offense started rusty. They found their rhythm. They started putting up points. But the defense really didn't do their job, and they put the offense in such a bad, hole. There was no way to dig themselves out of it. With that being said, though, obviously this season, the biggest question is the secondary. And the reason for that, though, is it's a new crew. No one really filling the transfer portal except for, Dylan Thieneman? Can't remember how to pronounce. I can't remember. I used to know how to pronounce it. Now I don't. Dylan Thieneman, and I think one other from Northwestern. However, but the rest of them are high school recruits. Finney, Dorian Brew, Naeem Offord, Flowers. Who's the other guy? Sione Laiula. Jaleel Florence is still there. He's staying for another year, which is good because it's an older vet, sort of experienced person. Ife, I can't remember. I keep getting confused with the old guy in 2014. Was it Ifo Ekpe Olamu? He was one of my favorite corners back then. But I think it's Ife Obadijwe. I can't remember. But so you got all these guys, though, that are high school recruits now that haven't really seen a lot of the field. Some of them have gone in during sort of a garbage time, and we sort of got to see what to sort of expect from them. But now it's different. They are now every snap guys. So this is a test, and especially with guys like Naeem Offord, it's a very talented crew. But the two biggest questions is how they will gel together, because again, just like an offensive line and a defensive line, but offensive line for sure, I think the next group after the offensive line where it's really important you have chemistry and a gelling of the teammates is the secondary. And in that is the tertiary of the linebackers. And because those are guys you want to be able to just look in their eye and telepathically communicate with them. They give you a look, okay, I'm covering up top on a cover 2, or I'm coming in, to help on a flat route or stop the run. Like, you want to be able to communicate that with a look. Or, we're playing man-to-man. That's my man. You got the tight end. You got the running back coming out. You got the slot receiver. Whatever it is. You want to be able to communicate that with a freaking look to your teammate. So that chemistry and communication is important. Now, granted, don't rely on the look. Just saying, if you had to, you can look. That just means that when you're giving hand signals, tapping the helmet, shoulder, whatever, yelling out random buzzwords, they'll know even better just because, the look counts. So far, that's one of the biggest things for Oregon as a team coming up this season. What does the secondary look like? It's a new crew, completely new crew. Jaleel Florence is the only one that is sort of the veteran status. The next oldest, I think, is Thieneman, who's a sophomore, transfer from Purdue. And I don't really begrudge Oregon taking him as one of the few transfers because he's one of those undeniable guys. You're like, oh, we can have him on the roster? Yeah, we'll take him. So he's going to be a big piece too. He's a guy that can cover and stop the run. So that is something we haven't seen in a long time, which I'm very excited to see. But yes, a very, very talented crew, but young. And this is mostly on the defensive side that I'm gonna say this with too. But the same goes a little bit later in the show. But on the defensive line end, obviously you got Mateo, who could be a first round draft pick after this year if he puts up equal, if not better numbers. He keeps getting better. The guys on the rest of the line, they're fresh in the sense that they're starters now, but they've been in the rotation many, many times last year. They're not completely green. The linebackers, Bryce Betcher stayed. He can help these new guys out. He can be that veteran leadership. Recruiting wise, it's still a hole for the team. But again, we don't know as much as we do with the D-line, but we know a little bit more than the secondary. The big thing is the secondary. And Oregon has had a history of pretty good secondaries. But in those years before they became their sort of Eugene version of Legion of Boom, it was always a rough go at the beginning. When they were true freshmen and sophomores, they had to develop on the field. And so this is what it will be for this secondary squad this year. And then they're going to have to rely on the defensive line to hold the line, cliche pun not intended or whatever, hold the line to give the secondary not the burden of the plays, like the defensive line needs to get more sacks than relying on the secondary to make plays, is what I'm saying. And that happened before with Oregon, where they had to rely on the D-line and the linebackers to carry it because there were going to be some development, growing pains with the secondary. And then a couple years later, when the secondary were the big men on campus, it was the other way. The secondary compensated for the D-line. So this is what it's going to look like probably this year. And there is a chance that some of these games that might be close or expected wins that aren't expected blowouts, there's more trap games than there were last year. And not simply because the other teams are getting better, which a number of them are, but because you have a young secondary. And unfortunately, falling flat on your face is often the biggest learning experiences. So the hope is that Oregon can go like a 10-2, 11-1, 13-0 or whatever, ideally, or whatever, wish upon a star they repeat that like last year. Very unlikely, but a good playoff making record despite having those growing pains. The flip side of that is there's a 9-3, maybe even worse, 8-4 playoff missing record that also develops. And this could be a step back year. And so I'm just saying to all the Duck fans out there, mentally prepare for that. Now, I hope that those whatever losses we have don't go to people like USC, Washington, and so on, all the teams that I'd like to have us curb stomp. But don't be surprised at the record. Now, with Dan Lanning's track record, we've seen that the records have gotten better as the years progress. We've gotten a 10-2 season, a 10-2 season or whatever, 11-2, whatever, if you count the postseason. And then this year, a 13-1 season with the Big Ten championship. That is good as far as a coach goes. This year, though, is the true statement year for Dan Lanning. Because now, 80% of his roster has been built by his high school recruiting. which is a good thing. Like discussed before, Dan Lanning sort of had to do a complete rebuild. And so now we're seeing more high school recruits and less transfers. But this year is really the year that we will get a look at what Dan Lanning will be like in the future as a coach, and what the next 3, 5, 7, 10, however many years that he's here looks like. Because this is now his roster. These are guys that have been developed and practicing under his system, his philosophy, his way of doing things on the field. This is sort of Dan Lanning's moment of truth. However, couple things. A step back year does not mean Dan Lanning's getting worse. Again, these are growing pains of having young guys, inexperienced guys. And the problem is, though, is the floor has more wiggle room than the ceiling. Because now at this point, the only step up is, first, you could say making the playoff, at least winning a playoff game now. But really, the biggest step forward is winning it all. And that is tough, even if it wasn't a step forward to do so. But still, if you made the playoffs and won a playoff game, that still is a step up. I'm just saying that 13-0 Big Ten championship, making the playoff at this state in Dan Lanning's tenure, is a hard thing to climb up for. And you can have a fall from grace way farther than going up from where you're at. That's just the math in my head. So this year, if it ends up being a step back year, that also doesn't mean necessarily anything bad for Dan Lanning, unless the year after that doesn't progress. Then it's like, okay, what's going on? That could be a problem. But for this year, I feel like the expectations should be hopeful, but not as high as they were previously. Because obviously the fact that Lanning had to rebuild the roster from the transfer portal, he might as well have gotten the transfer portal full of world-beating rosters, and that's what happened in 2023 and 2024. And arguably 2022. But definitely 23 and 24. This year, though, those world-beating rosters that were transferred are gone. And now it's the ones that are built from the bottom up. So I think expectations should be tempered, but hopeful. I'm very excited to see what the secondary looks like. And from what I saw from the spring game, it was great. Naeem Offord looked great as expected. And the rest looked good too. You know what I mean? Like, it didn't seem like a major talent gap. I'm hoping that Florence will be healthy, fully healthy and ready to go by the time the season comes. But if not, it seems like we're in okay enough hands. My favorite thing that I saw in that spring game, thank God finally, that if these defensive backs weren't turning around at least, even though they often did, at the very least, they were meeting the receiver, catching the ball at the highest point of contact with the ball. My biggest pet peeve is, one, if these defensive backs are in phase, they don't turn around. They're just running after the receiver like this. Face forward at the receiver. It's like, what does that do? Also, you're not beat. Why don't you just turn around and make a play on the ball? every time when I played left corner and free safety, that was the exact play that I was itching for. Because I'm like, yes, finally, a ball coming my way I can pick. But they don't turn around when they're in phase. I understand when you're out of phase, you're running for your life to catch up. But if you can't really make a play on the ball in terms of turning around and intercepting it, you see that receiver looking, and maybe you can't look back to see the throw or whatever. At the very least, you're sticking on your receiver, and the second he jumps, you jump. So you can meet the ball like a basketball rebound. Get it up there. This is where the receiver has the least control of the ball. And what I see is defensive backs waiting till either the receiver catches it up here with his hands and brings it in, or the receiver's catching it in the breadbasket and they're trying to swat it out of the breadbasket. Why are you doing that? That's the hardest. The receiver with the ball like this, that's the hardest point of the catch to hit the ball out. Why do you wait until this part? Get up here, swat at it up here. It's like, come on, it's common sense. But that's what was happening in the spring game. Naeem Offord getting up there. And luckily, again, they're all tall now. They're all the taller 6'1" to 6'5" defensive backs. So they can play that basketball with these receivers now. They're getting up there, high point of the ball, and they were responsible for a goal line stand on 3 pass plays. They were all making that same play, batting it down. I love seeing that so much. You have no idea. So there's so much to look forward to with this crew. And it's nice at least to have the only concern being learning experience. So that is one big thing that I am very excited for this season. I am, if anything, if there's some disappointment from the team, I'm at least excited to see that they're just going to get better as the year and next year and the years go by. So those are the big questions on the defensive side. Other than just what's the linebackers going to look like at this point? Because again, they're new guys too, but they're being led by Betcher. Devin Jackson, I hope, is healthy. I heard some rumors about things. I hope that's not entirely true, that he's ready to go. I think there was something that happened during fall camp or something that I'm hoping isn't true come season beginning. But the Ducks have that crazy problem with linebackers that get injured before the season. God, Peter Sermon was a big one in 1998. They built the entire defense around him because they had built in Eugene at the time in 1998. What was the super team? They had Achilles Smith, Reuben Drones. All these guys, they thought they were natty. Achilles Smith was making a Heisman run. There was theoretically going to have his Heisman campaign that year. And Peter Sermon goes down, the lead, the captain of the team linebacker that they had built the entire defense around. Gets injured before the season, so the defense was struggling from the get-go. And then Reuben Drones goes down against UCLA a few weeks into the season. It just never ends for the Ducks and injuries, does it? But, again, these guys, the linebackers have seen some time. They're not freshmen, so not all of them at least are freshmen. And it looks like there's some playmakers on that front. So for me, at least, there's some questions with the linebackers, but not as much as the secondary just because it's so fresh. I mean, you got guys that Naeem Offord, committed December, and they're throwing him on the field now. And granted, Naeem Offord is just one of those guys, one of those blue chip 5-star guys that you can trust to do that. But, again, college is different from high school. Very different. on the defensive side. So, but it's still exciting. I'm excited, and I'm hoping that the defensive scheme though gets better. I like Tosh Lupoi. I think he's pretty good at what he does. However, if things go awry with the roster that he and Lanning have built, I'll start to think his seat it's not warm, it's not hot, but someone turned the heat on. I'm not completely sold on Lupoi yet. I like that the defense has gotten better. I like that they're actually paying attention to the defense than the Chip Kelly days, or Helfrich days with Pelham. Much respect, Oregon legend, but he was just not meant to be a coordinator. Because here's the thing. Here's the thing about the Ducks, okay? Even when the team and the program as a whole was mediocre in the 80s, or actually I think in the 70s, in the 80s, and in the 90s, their defense was called gangrene. Their defense was the strength of the program. They built the team around the defense because of offensive struggles. And then, of course, it flipped over the past 20 to 25 years. But I would say more like 15 years, because in the early to mid 2000s, you had guys like Igor Olshansky, Haloti Nada, who's the other guy? Dang it. He was on the 99 team. What was it? Quinn something. He was the reason why we beat Wisconsin. Whatever. We had dudes and dogs on defense. Kevin Mitchell, Rashad Bowman, Keith Lewis in the secondary and in the linebacking core. We had dogs on defense, and the defense was good. We were a defensive school, or program. Sorry, Southern Preacher's coming out. So this whole narrative or reputation that Oregon's an offensive only school was really only recently. So I'm glad that that's being turned around now, where no, we're going to focus and be a defensive team. I just quite haven't seen the walk reflect the talk yet. And I don't necessarily think it's a lack of talent. I think every time that the defense struggled was scheme. I am rooting and want Tosh to be the guy. I like his style. I like that he's a good recruiter. I like that he's intense. He's what you're looking for in a defensive coordinator. I just would like to see more of that chess player sort of thing roll out. Excuse me. But maybe it's just now he's got the team that he wants, and we're going to see that. So who knows? But we'll see. This is also a year for sort of Tosh Lupoi to show what he's made of, as well as Lanning in that way now. And I have a lot more trust of Lanning than I do Tosh at this point. But I love to be wrong. See, here's the thing about the internet and opinion and sports talk, whatever, podcasts. No one likes to admit they're wrong. Guess what? I'm okay admitting I'm wrong. Hell, my ex and my current or whatever person I'm with, my ex loved to tell me how wrong I am. So, I might need to cut that out. I'll just say every woman I've ever been with loves to tell me how I'm wrong. I'm okay admitting I'm wrong, though. So in this case, I would love to be proven wrong. You know why? Because that's a good thing. I would, it's like making a bet. Like I bet you $5 million I can't make $1 million, or what? That's a bad analogy because the math doesn't check out. But basically, if you make a bet where it's like I win a good amount of money anyway, even if I lose. That's kind of what it is, I'm okay being proven wrong. This is just as I see things, as the information is clear to me now. So, on the offensive side, though, looking forward past the media days into the 2025 season, Dan Lanning obviously was asked about Dante Moore, and he said the quarterback competition is great, blah, blah, blah. He gave that sort of cookie cutter answer to not talk about single out Dante Moore and the rest of the quarterbacks, single Dante out as the guy and single out as everyone else being benched. He was talking about quarterback competition. And then, of course, you got people on the internet being like, oh, that's not good if a coach is saying that, You need to know your quarterback by now, blah, blah, blah. And there's a level of truth to that, but also he said the same thing when he got Bo Nix. When Bo Nix showed up on campus, Ty Thompson was the competition, and he was saying the same thing. And then when Dylan Gabriel was there last year, it was the same thing. Dante could very much take his spot. It's a quarterback competition. This, again, is from the Nick Saban School of Football Coaching. How motivating is that to the rest of your team if you're also looking for depth to be like, yep, that's our guy. Everyone else can screw off. They don't need to work hard. No, you say, yeah, we got a good competition. Everyone else can play to win, and we're pushing them to try to play to win, and we're going to decide who the starter is. Well, probably behind the scenes, you know who the starter is. But again, leaving that open, who knows? Maybe it doesn't work out. Novosad crushes, and that's it. So, of course, you say that. And that doesn't mean that's a bad thing or it's a scary moment, blah, blah, blah. For now, I have pretty decent trust in Dante Moore, who is kind of the big question. Because, again, you had Bo Nix in the transfer portal, and then you had Dylan Gabriel from the transfer portal. The last guy that was sort of 4 years ride or die for the Ducks was Herbert during Cristobal, so it's a completely new coaching staff. You don't know. We just don't know what it looks like. Dante Moore originally was one of Lanning's recruits in 2022. He committed to Oregon. And then he flipped to UCLA and went to a very dysfunctional Chip Kelly-led UCLA, and he was supposed to carry the team to victory as a freshman. And then Dante Moore made the very mature decision to say, you know what? If I stick this out, I'm going to get buried. And it's not going to work out for me. The instability, the team that's not built, because also Kelly is a notorious person that could give a shit about recruiting. That's sort of what hurt us, the Oregon Ducks as a program, was Kelly and Helfrich not realizing that the lifeblood of a program is recruiting. They just take anyone off the street and try to make them overperform. And I'm not all for star chasing and being on the internet yelling at each other about 17-year-olds like some weird NAMBLA convention. But you still have to focus on recruiting. So, side note, Moore made the mature decision to go to a place that originally he was going to, sure. but to a place with more stability where he can actually maybe take a step back from being thrown into the wolves, leave the wolves, develop, and get back at it. I trust that kind of mindset in a quarterback. I don't think people really understand that mindset because especially now in the NIL transfer portal era, everyone wants to chase the bag and playing time. It takes someone of great maturity to say, you know what? I can be ready. I just need the time to work hard to be ready. And I'm going to take a step back and not prioritize playing time. I'll have my moment. That moment was promised to me, but I'm going to earn it too. So for now, and seeing some of the throws that he made in the spring game, I understand why they weren't really going to let him, ball out for health reasons, like keeping him away from injury and just giving a little taste, From that little taste that I saw, I liked what I saw. Very accurate. He throws ropes and he takes care of the ball. And I know it's sort of meme that, oh, that was the greatest incompletion I've ever seen. But it really does mean something that when a quarterback throws an incomplete pass, it's incomplete. And no one else can get it if the receiver can't get it. And it's not going to be tipped or picked because of a bad throw, whatever. So that's all you need from a quarterback, a guy that's accurate and can take care of the ball. So I think we're in good hands. But again, from what we saw at UCLA was very inconsistent, and the highs were high and the lows were low. So this year, the question is, have we gotten Dante Moore some stability in his play and in the system that he doesn't have to worry and he could just go for it? And the situation of his playing is arguably higher pressure than playing at UCLA. He's going to be in bigger games. He's going to be in more high-pressure situations. How will he handle it? Because you had a guy like Ty Thompson that could seem very chill, but maybe a little too chill, where those big moments don't work for him. So that's going to be the question about Dante Moore. What I don't really, I don't know. I like Novosad. I like Moga. Don't get me wrong. It's just sort of never mind. Running quarterbacks are very popular. I'll just say that. Yeah. Everyone likes the flash. But here's the thing, though. We can say it's a new era, better athletes, all this other kind of stuff. But the bottom line is defense wins championships no matter what era you're in. So when I'm looking at a team that can compete or in the future can compete at championships, I'm still looking at the defense. So that's what I'm going to be looking for. What's the potential of the defense versus what it is as is? It's going to be young. So I will grade on a curve on that. And I will look at it, how it is now, and then assess, this looks pretty good for the outlook. And that way, that's when you should be determining the championship contending defense. Now, I am going to have us take a little bit of a break. Going to go on a 5 or so minute break. And we will be back with our next segment. So stick around. All right, welcome back to the show. By the way, if you want to follow me, find me on Instagram at SDP_studios, Facebook at SDP Studios. I have a Substack page. You can find all the links in the description below. Please donate to my GoFundMe in order to help me complete my documentary about the Oregon Ducks football program. And go ahead and subscribe, please. I'd love to build a subscriber base and an audience. And just so you know, again, at this time on Fridays, in the coming 4 weeks, I will not be doing this show. I will try to do it on Thursdays and Tuesdays. Tuesdays and Thursdays. But I'm going to do one show before the game, and then I want to do one after the games on Saturday. But I can't do them Fridays because I'll be covering high school football. And believe it or not, the high school football show doesn't start until about 10 minutes from now, usually. So it's like 10:15 to midnight. So it's a late gig, and I'm usually up till 2, 3 in the morning working on the show. Sorry for digging gold there. I had a nose itch. But, so look for this on Tuesdays and Thursdays, coming in about a month. Now, it's going to be a little bit less consistent, and I'll just do it whenever. The past couple weeks, it's been on Fridays for whatever reason. But, yes, the best way to keep track, though, for now and in the future is to subscribe. Please subscribe. Help a brother out. Help a dude pay some rent. Now, obviously, we've discussed the 2 top questions. How will Dante Moore perform moving forward? How will the secondary look and the defense as a whole? Looking at the running backs, I think we're pretty good so far. I don't give a fuck what anyone says. Oregon is running back you. That's a hot take to some, but to those who actually know the history of the program, not as hot of a take. Now, the offensive line, we're probably going to see similar issues that we did last year because it's a new group and they need to gel. Hopefully I'm wrong, but that's why you have a tune-up game, and hopefully it's not as close as it was with Idaho last year. That was incredibly frustrating. I wanted to go to bed early and I couldn't the first couple weeks, but on paper, we should be pretty darn safe, I'll say. Not pretty darn good, but pretty darn safe at offensive line. I want to get to the receivers, though, because I am very, very sad about Evan Stewart being out. He sort of took a backseat role despite the big plays that he made last year. But last year seemed to be kind of the get Tez to the NFL year. And Evan Stewart kind of took a back seat to Tez, and it worked. Tez just is Tez. But this was sort of supposed to be Evan Stewart's year to be the Tez role, basically. He's got it in him. I think Oregon at this point has sort of proved to be the career revival school in terms of some of these touted recruits that sort of get lost at other programs like Bo Nix, and they find themselves a little bit in Eugene, and they actually play the way they were expected to play when they showed up. And with Evan Stewart, it was kind of the same. He was a little bit not necessarily his fault. Had underwhelming stats at Texas A&M. I think he may have gotten the wool pulled over his eyes at A&M, and he was finding his resurgence at Oregon. And he was a big reason why we beat Ohio State the first time. He had 2 huge plays, and it looked effortless. That's the craziest thing with him. He makes these crazy catches. And that one, I think it was against Michigan, that got called back. It was so infuriating. That was catch of the year. Catch of the year. And he makes it look so effortless. He's just a natural. He himself is a generational talent. And it really does matter where you go when you play to showcase that generational talent that you have. So this year, though, was supposed to be his year. He was a veteran. Finally, not finally, but, he's the veteran of a young receiver core. And it's just sad to see that he's gone this year. There's rumors that he could be back later in the season. However, I think what's best for him is that he gets a medical red shirt this year, sits out the year, recovers. Recovery is so important to injury. I cannot emphasize that enough. And he gets bigger, better, stronger, faster during that recovery. And he just worries about playing next year and balling out next year. I would like to see that. And it is unfortunate we lose a veteran in the receiving core this year, because that just, again, it makes the offense younger, just as much younger as the defense. And we're open to those rookie mistakes. But obviously there's talent in the receiving room where not that Evan Stewart's replaceable, but it's not a season ender like it would be in the past for Oregon as a program. And it's good that we have that depth, in the sense that Evan Stewart should take his time to recover and get healthy, because as much as I want him on the field in Autzen, he does need to think about the next level. And I think the best thing for him in the next level is giving his best last year to Oregon and not trying to push himself and blow out his knee trying to come back too early. So I think that is the best path for him. Again, though, it's his decision. But that doesn't mean that there's nothing exciting coming out of the wide receiver room. And, of course, there's DeCorian Moore. And the more-to-more connection, there's him. But based on the spring game, I am excited to see what Dylan Grisham can do. Wow, he went off. And he caught attention. Not just from me, I think other people. It's like, woo. Dude can go. And obviously last year, Justice Flo was impressive. He had some impressive performances already playing in game time scenarios against Michigan. Was one of his bigger performances when Tez had to go out for a couple minutes. But Justice Flo has proven himself. I'm excited to see how he's developing. I'm excited to see Jeremiah McClellan get some playing time, because he was a guy we flipped from Ohio State, which Ohio State is wide receiver U. And I know that Oregon is trying to look. Oregon has a distinguished history at wide receiver. There's just no debate on that. Given the history of the program, if you look into the history of the program, we're no slouch of wide receivers. So the problem is that basically since Cristobal, that's been something, that's a muscle that the program has let atrophy. But there's no denying that, I don't know, forever, that Ohio State is wide receiver U. So if Ohio State wants you in Jeremiah McClellan as a 4-star, you got to be legit in some way. So I'm excited to finally see him maybe see the field a little more with Oregon. When you watch the Ducks versus them, when there were blowouts and the coaches would be talking to each other on the headsets about putting McClellan in, they sound excited. So I think they know what they got, and they're excited to put him on the field. So there's got to be a reason why. So I'm excited to see him on the field as well. Jurion Dickey, he looked good in the spring game. He's looked good in spring games before. The problem, again, too, though, is he got hit with the injury bug, and that's not his fault. And you want to see someone like him overcome that adversity and recover and come back better than ever off injury. And you just love to see that he has a loyalty to the team and Oregon, and he didn't transfer once he got healthy just to play somewhere else or anything. He bought in, he's loyal, and he seems legit and earned that 5-star rating back in the day. And I'm so frustrated for him that in terms of his physical health, the rug keeps getting pulled from him. And every time he's like, all right, I'm ready to go. Let's do this. Something happens to his body where he gets the rug pulled from him again. And Oregon stuck with him. And he stuck with Oregon. And I really want to see him get rewarded for that. I want him to see playing time. I want him to stay healthy. And I want to see him put up big numbers. I want nothing but the best for Jurion Dickey. And therefore, I'm excited to see him play and what he could do. Dylan Grisham, obviously Kenyon Sadiq. I mean, come on, this guy is an animal. He is just undeniable. So obviously looking forward to seeing him as a tight end. The guy from Louisville, I can't remember his name. Is it Jeremiah Johnson? Jericho Johnson? I can't remember. I apologize. Big tight end, though. It's like 6'7" or something. He's huge. I like to see what he can do, but bottom line, though, is on the receiver core. There's so many. I'm sure I forgot other big ones that I am excited to see. I just can't remember. Cooper Perry. I'd like to see Kyler Casper in there. I know he's had an injury bug too, but just so many guys on that team on receiver. I'm excited to see what they can do, and especially with the lapse in having Evan Stewart, which is unfortunate. And I hope that Evan Stewart next year has the year that would, in the NFL otherwise win him, comeback player of the year type of thing in college. So with Comic-Con of the college football world, again, there's really not a whole lot you can really get out of it. Because again, these coaches, you have coaches that will complain about things like Lanning about the playoff system, Kurt Signetti about the SEC scheduling, which, talk your shit, Kurt, go for it. I agree with you on that. All the other stuff that you talk, I don't know yet. But again, I don't mind coaches that do that. Talk your shit. Why not? And then prove it on the field if you can. If you don't, eat your words, take the L. So what? That's the beauty of sports. That's how it's done. James Franklin complaining about traveling, which is hilarious considering he's in Penn State and all the West Coast teams are staring at him like, the travel sucks, huh? But yeah, so again, you're really only gonna get enough sound bites to get the ESPNs and the Fox Sports News or Fox Sports Ones of the world enough ammo to carry you through the rest of the month. Because the off season sucks, and I am beyond ready for some good old college football. Like the memes say, I will watch, San Diego Barber College Tech versus a local high school team if it's televised at this point. College football is college football. But it's a lot of it too is just to build some hype and have some fun. And I am excited for the season. I don't have expectations for the team this year. The only expectation I have is for them to be good and get better. And that's what I really want to see. And again, on the subject of the playoff, because I did want to hit on this too. And here's the thing too, because before 1998, you had AP and coaches polls deciding the national champions. And then obviously there was controversy with that. And then they went to the BCS system where it's like, okay, we'll plug it into a computer and they can decide who plays for the championship. We're now going to have a game that decides the champion. We're not going to do this majority picks the winner type of thing. And then everyone wants to go to a playoff, arguably. I would argue because of Oregon's 2001 season. That's when I remember playoff discussions sort of kind of starting, to be honest. I could make that a topic for a video for another time. That I think there were some cases and seasons, not just 2001, but that one was definitely the one with the biggest message sent about maybe we should get away from the BCS after the way Oregon's season panned out. But everyone wanted to go to the playoff, and then we got a 4-team playoff. And the 4-team playoff happened, and there were still some issues with the exclusivity in terms of getting in the third and fourth spot. And people were like, we need to expand it to get to away from the BCS format, basically. Because there were still sort of the side effects of the BCS of bias and exclusivity with the 4-team playoff. So let's just expand it to 12. And most people agree with it. I agree with it. We needed to go more than 4 teams. The problem is, though, is the culture of how you play the seasons change. So in the BCS era, even before that, your goal was to win every single damn game you played. Every game was a Super Bowl. You could not lose, especially if you were a team like Oregon, Boise State, Utah, those teams that would get heavily penalized if you lost one game versus Alabama, where it's like, the SEC's a gauntlet. So you lose in a field goal fest, you get the benefit of the doubt. You stay number 1. BCS national champions, whatever. I won't complain about Alabama because they were legit under Saban. I'm just giving a hyperbolic example. The way it is with the playoff, though, has changed drastically. So, back when Oregon State won their first baseball World Series championship was 2006. I was in 8th grade going into freshman year of high school. And they won. And then the next year in 2007, I was a freshman going into sophomore year of high school. And I believe they were not going to be going to Omaha. And then Arizona State voted and vouched for Oregon State to go. Said they're good. They need to be in the World Series or the Super Regionals. It was basically the postseason, if I remember correctly. But the bottom line, though, was that Oregon State was basically a coin flip away from not being in the postseason. Well, they got into the postseason, and guess what? The team caught fire, and they made a run, and they won their back-to-back national championship. During that time, in that age, I also was still playing sports. And we had postseasons like playoffs and series and tournaments and everything. And the biggest thing as a fan too, especially. And this is the trap that I think Oregon fans fell into last year because we were on a heater during the regular season. The problem is with the playoff system, you're adding more games to your schedule. So instead of going 13-0, which the Oregon Ducks did last year, and 10 years ago would have got them the national championship, 13-0. The problem is now that you've made the playoffs, you now have to go 16-0 to win the national championship because of a playoff. At this point, especially with the way the Rose Bowl turned out, I think the Oregon fan base would have traded the win at Autzen for a win in the Rose Bowl. They easily would have taken the L versus Ohio State and Autzen, and especially after they beat Ohio State at Autzen, people were talking about throwing the Penn State game because of seeding. But the idea, though, is I think at this point the Ducks would have rather exchange a loss or two in the regular season, made the playoffs, and ended up winning for a win in the Rose Bowl, and so on in the rest of the postseason. That's all you need now. The game, the strategy of the game has changed. In the regular season, all you need to do, and don't get me wrong, what Oregon did in the regular season last year was awesome. It's rare a team joins the conference and wins the conference. Usually they're sort of bottom feeders, and then a few years later they win. So that is, a thing on its own. But in terms of the national championship, the idea is make the playoffs. That's it in the regular season. Win games, yes. Win enough games, though, to get in the playoffs. Get on a heater in the playoffs. You want to hit your peak of the season. And this was the problem that I saw, too, last year, which was like, oh, no, we're not doing it. Because we peaked in October. And you saw that slide in November, aside from the Washington game where we beat the brakes off the Fuskies. You saw that slow decline. And the Penn State game in the Big Ten Championship was like, uh-oh, we're hitting the bottom of that decline. We're getting there. We were able to just withstand Penn State long enough that we won. And then the Ohio State game happened, and Ohio State took advantage of that. They peaked at the wrong time. However the regular season works doesn't matter as much as making sure your peak of the season is in the postseason now. That's all that matters. And that happened with Ohio State last year. They did not play well in September and October. Everyone was calling for Rogaine or whatever the fuck just for men's head in September and October, especially after they lost to the Ducks. For some reason, losing to the Ducks was an insult to their manhood. I don't know why. It was two good teams playing each other. It could have gone either way. But they weren't slumping because to slump, you kind of have to be at a peak going down. They peaked, though, at the right time. They lost to Michigan, but they were in the postseason. And then they peaked right as the postseason started, and they became the buzzsaw that ran through everyone, and they're national champions this year. Congratulations to them. That is the strategy. Get on a heater at the right time. And the right time is postseason. And that's what I learned too back in the day when I watched Oregon State do that. And I experienced it with my own basketball team. Around that time, I think it was a year or two before, we made the playoffs. We struggled a little bit in the playoffs, and then we got on a heater in the championship game, and we were down by a good chunk. We were all but lost in that game, and our team made a great comeback and won the championship. So it's getting hot at the right time. And with the way that the season now, the college football season plays out, you don't want to peak in October. And that doesn't mean you play terrible football, but you want to make sure your peak and the most locked in that you are is in December and January. And that's the only way now, because the season has gotten longer and more grueling, and now there's a playoff atmosphere where every team feels like they have a chance, and they're going to play their asses off to either upset you or beat your ass. And that's what the playoffs were for. It was for teams that were on the edge of the BCS or the 4 team. Now they've expanded it to where, like, all right, these are teams that didn't get a chance to play for it, and they're going to play for it. And sometimes they'll upset, and sometimes they won't. It won't be as much as a guaranteed Cinderella story as March Madness. Ooh. But that is the case, and that is the key. So a lot of these wins and stuff that you get in September and October are great and all, but you want to make sure the Ducks peak at the right time. So what I mean by that too is that, who knows, maybe with this young squad, we're going to struggle for a while. Hopefully we can pull out enough wins to make the playoffs, and then these guys develop and have played enough where, boom, they peak at the right time in the postseason. But at this point, even with young teams, the only thing that you can really do is just win enough games to make the postseason and play your ass off and hope the postseason plays out as it should. So that is sort of the ceiling that I'm imagining for the Ducks this year. I don't think they'll go undefeated in the regular season. I just hope that the games that we drop are not to our rivals. And there are some trap games in there simply because our team is younger and more inexperienced. But nothing, it would not hurt for Oregon to be a young team that would make the playoff. So I'm hoping they can put together enough of a run to make the playoffs and then make a run in the playoffs. Because again, that is an accomplishment in and of itself when you're a young team. So, you kick in the door, and I know people have said the same sentence about the Ducks enough, but it is true. You kick the door long enough, eventually it's going to open for you. And so at this point, the goal should just be getting that playoff bracket. Every single year, getting that playoff bracket. And once you do, make sure it's at the hottest time of your season. That's the strategy. And so this year, I would be very happy if they made the playoffs, and if they lose in the first round, I will be less disappointed as last year when they lost, because at least it would be more expected than last year. So that is sort of my, and again, College Football with Sam has the numbers where he actually lays it out. So Oregon's ceiling obviously is 12-0. That is a realistic ceiling. That's what he says is a realistic ceiling. I agree. They could. Every team that they have on the schedule is completely beatable to this talented roster. But because of the youth and experience, he has the realistic floor of being 8-4. And I agree with that. Again, you just don't know. And with age comes consistency. So we will see, though, especially because the rest of the teams have their roster changes and everything like that. And it does help that Oregon has a bit of an easier schedule this year, with the hardest game being at Penn State, which we all, again, because Penn State has done the Ohio State strategy of basically having an NFL roster of experienced guys that they convinced to stay one more year to make one big push for the national championship, that they have an NFL roster basically try to make one final push for the national championship. Oregon fans and everyone has all but expected basically this to be an automatic loss. So 11-1 with the rest of the schedule seems the most realistic. Again, anything can happen, but again, we're just playing probabilities here. And of course, there's trap games like Washington, USC, guys like Iowa, Wisconsin, Indiana. Again, those could be games that trip up inexperienced teams. Either way, though, I think it's going to be an exciting and fun season. And I look forward to covering all the games and going over sort of my gut analysis of everything, and following this team this season, because even if we take a step back record-wise on the stat sheet, I think we're taking a step up as a program, and it'll be fun to see that journey as time goes on. So I think that is it for me today. It is very late. I usually won't do a show this late. I got started late. Doesn't matter. No one's watching. But hopefully to those of you who end up watching, thank you for doing so. And be sure to subscribe and continue to watch. And enjoy the show. Enjoy the rest of the channel. And hopefully you will be engaged enough to keep watching and start chatting with me, because we could talk about anything, especially Oregon football and college football going into the future. But as it stands right now, I hope y'all have a good night. Don't know why I went Texan. I think because I said y'all and then it kind of just trailed off into that. But yes, have a good night and go Ducks.
Foot race to their sideline. Touchdown, Oregon!